These are compilation of works by Alexandra Byrne, Sandy Powell for 2 movies, RuthCarter and Zophres. Fashion in the period 1550 to 1600 in Western European clothing was characterized by increased opulence. Contrasting fabrics, slashes, embroidery, applied trims, and other forms of surface ornamentation remained prominent. The wide silhouette, conical for women with breadth at hips and broadly square for men with width at shoulders, had reached its peak, and by mid-century, a tall, narrow line with a V-shaped waist was worn back in fashion. Sleeves and women's skirts then began to widen again. The characteristic garment of the period was the ruff, which began as a modest ruffle attached to the neckband of a shirt or smock and grew into a separate garment of fine linen, trimmed with lace, cutwork or embroidery, and shaped into crisp, precise folds with starch and the heated iron. Since Elizabeth I, Queen of England, was the ruler, women's fashion became one of the most important aspects of this period, as the Queen was always required to have a pure image, and although women's fashion became increasingly seductive, the idea of the perfect Elizabethan woman was never forgotten. Elizabethan era had its own customs and social rules that were reflected in their fashion. Style would depend usually on social status, and Elizabethans were bound to obey the Elizabethans' sumptuary laws, which oversaw the style and materials worn. Fashion in the period 1900 to 1909 in the Western world continued the long, elegant lines of the 1890s. Tall, stiff collars characterize the period, as do women's broad hats and full Gibson girl hairstyles. A new columnar silhouette introduced by the couturiers of Paris, thus approaching abandonment of the corset as an indispensable garment. For women, with the decline of the bustle, sleeves began to increase in size and the 80-30 silhouette of an hourglass shape became popular again. The fashionable silhouette in the early 20th century was that of a confident woman with full low chest and curvy hips. The health corset of this period removed pressure from the abdomen and created an S-curved silhouette. They are moving out of the Victorian era and into the Edwardian era, were starting to dress for a more active lifestyle. The evolving times brought a new fashion trend known as the New Woman. Active lives required less constricting clothing and required simpler and more streamlined clothing. The New Woman was highly encouraged by women's suffrage. For men, the long, lean and athletic silhouette of the 1890s persisted. Hair was generally worn short, beards were less pointed than before, and mustaches were often curled. Fashion in the period 1700 to 1750 in European and European-influenced countries is characterized by a widening silhouette for both men and women, following the tall, narrow look of the 1680s and 90s. This era is defined as late baroque or rococo style. The new fashion trends introduced during this era had a greater impact on society, affecting not only royalty and aristocrats, but also middle and even lower classes. Clothing during this time can be characterized by soft pastels, light, airy and asymmetrical designs, and playful styles. Wigs remained essential for men and women of substance and were often white. Natural hair was powdered to achieve the fashionable look. Fashion magazines emerged during this era. For women, in the early decades of the new century, formal dress consisted of the stiff-bodice mantua, a close or round petticoat, sometimes worn with an apron, replaced the open-draped mantua skirt of the previous period. This formal style then gave way to more relaxed fashions. Tiny pieces of fabric known as patches, in the shapes of dots, hearts, stars, etc., were applied to the face with adhesive. The fashion is thought to have originated as a way of disguising pox scars and other blemishes, but gradually developed coded meanings. For example, a patch on the right cheek denoted marriage, one on left cheek announced engagement, and one at the corner of the eye signified a mistress. For men, the male suit were made of three parts: the justacorps, a jacket, and breeches. The African continent comprises of various tribes and significant cultures. The blanket cloaks is a traditional gear of Basotho people. In Lesotho, a mountainous country surrounded by South Africa, which gets snow in the winter, the Basotho blanket holds deep significance. The Maasai warriors in Kenya and Tanzania are instantly recognized by the red and blue checkered robe. The female soldiers also have their tribal uniforms, particularly in the 1600s Dahomey. In their day, the Dahomey Amazons, as they were named by Western historians, fought wars for the kingdom, most notably against colonial French forces, which existed from the 1600s in Dahomey, present-day Republic of Benin in West Africa. Early American Western clothing in the years prior to about 1830s was hardly fashion at all. It was practical. It had to be. The American frontier was open only to hunters, trappers, explorers, and traders. Early Americans traded more than one palm. They adopted Indian forms of clothing. Buckskins made from soft-suited deerskin were often fringed and decorated with beads or animal teeth or bones. Much of American fashion in the 1800s was derived from European styles. Other styles evolved to fit life in the Old West. With very few broad walks and no paved roads, the need for extended protection drove styles toward work boots and riding boots. The dependence on horses in the frontier led to the development of rifle coats and cowboy dusters. Long length and ample cut were needed to protect people on horseback. Women's Western clothing has taken on more ornamentation and been modified by experimental cuts and designs. Hispanic designs and ornamentation have added variety and new lines to Old West styles.